Yeah, great. Thanks, Cole. We do have some questions coming in here, and we definitely got plenty of time here for questions. And before we get to those questions, just real quick, as promised, I wanted to go over with everybody how we can here we go. Incorporate this into the Lead for Homes program. So we're going to go ahead and discuss just real quickly before we get to those questions, how we incorporate this. So here everyone can see up here, this is basically an inquiry and an official what they call lead addenda for ADUs, how to handle them in the Lead for Homes rating system, whether it's the old version or the new version, V4, V4.1. So the link's up there. We sent this out to everybody so you have it. There are two different ways to handle it. The first one being you can complete the ADU as a completely separate certification on a completely separate checklist. I would say in most cases that's probably not favorable at all due to cost and extra work and time involved. And so what we typically recommend is option number 2 here. And as you can see, USGBC strongly recommends option number 2, especially when there are shared mechanical systems. But this is basically, even if the ADU is detached from the home, you're going to consider the ADU's square footage and bedrooms within the energy model completed on the project. And so you're obviously going to have to work with your HERS rater on how to figure that out, because that is certainly a little bit of a different approach, and you'll have to work with their HERS provider to figure out how you're going to do that. That's going to be subjective each project. But USGBC is allowing you to embed those two. And I will show you here that there are many benefits to taking Pack 2 rather than completing a separate certification on number 1. I would say taking Path 1 makes the most sense when the main home has already been built, and then the ADU, in the case of this conversation, then the ADU has is just being a separate added-on construction. Then of course Path 1 makes the most sense as a separate certified project, unless you're also doing a renovation of number 2. So that's just something to consider. So what credits are impacted? We're looking at EA minimum energy performance, EA credit annual energy use, location and transportation, credit compact development, materials and resources, credit construction waste management, and water efficiency credit total water use. Now the first 3 I'm going to go over. The last 2 are pretty self-explanatory. So for example, with construction waste management, if you're doing the calculated approach, you basically get rewarded for having less square footages and more bedrooms, which is what's going to happen when you embed an ADU into the main house during a new construction project. So what that basically means is you have less waste you have to mitigate, but those calculations will change if you're adding the 2 together. And then on the WE total water use, again, any water you're using in the main building, in the main home, you're going to also factor in the flow rates on the spreadsheet for the water being used in the ADU. And if they're the same flow rate fixtures, same toilet flow rates, you name it, then you would just say, there's 2 or 3 of them, and you would just count how many bathrooms there are. If they're separate, different in the ADU, maybe if you're building this separately, then it would be, you would have to factor in those different flow rates in the total home performance. So those are just, I'm not going to go over those too much. Those are pretty much self-explanatory. Now the LT compact development, I just want to be clear here that as long as you can hit 7 dwelling units per acre, that's when you score your first point in this one. So we don't typically see single family homes scoring points here. But if you're on a total project boundary with buildable land area of roughly 0.28 acres, and forgive me, I don't know how that transfers into square feet at this point, But if you're doing, if you're saying we're doing, you know, two projects, then you can pick up that, you know, that extra ADU by saying you have two units there. So that is one benefit here if you're on a really tight building lot with limited acreage. And then, of course, on the energy side, this is an example. I just took a random home that we had. And then if you look at it, this is the house without the ADU added into it. It had a HERS index of 45. It was doing 57% better on the lead energy budget. This is all from the REM rate software. And then we went ahead and said, okay, what if somebody was building, you know, a 300 square foot ADU with one bedroom and superimposed it into this same project that was under construction? So that bumped up the square footage here, as you can see, to 1,200 square feet from 900 from the original one, as you can see there. And let's see, I can get a little drawing tool here. So you can see the original one had 973, 2-bedroom, and then you can see the new one had 1,273, 3-bedroom, and that bumped down the score to 41. Lower is better, and it bumped up the doing better than lead by 66% from where it was originally 57%. So you can see it increases your lead energy points by adding in that ADU into the main house through the energy model. But the way you're going to do that is going to be very subjective with your HERS rate or your energy provider. So I just went over a basic review of sort of the high level approach to that, if you will. All right, so let's get to your questions though. And as your questions are coming in, just real quick, take that survey that pops up at the end. Same one's emailed to you. Only take it once. And for those of you listening on demand in the future, not right now, you will need to take a quiz with an 80% passing rate to pick up your CEUs. To access that quiz on our website, head down to the YouTube link, click that. On the left there, click Show More, and then on the right there, you'll see there'll be a link. Click that link and it will take you to the quiz and follow the instructions on how to submit your quiz. And then also, before we get to your questions, a huge thanks to our board of directors, our volunteers, and then all of our sponsors as well, especially T-Stud, structurally insulated framing systems, Panasonic to meet all your ventilation needs from complying with code to now smart ventilation, and then Mitsubishi All Electric, which makes perfect ductless mini splits that could service any kind of ADU, both for heating and cooling for the most part. So yeah, let's take a look at some of those questions. You know, one question that I had was the study, the multifamily, or the study that Oregon put out, where it showed multifamily housing sort of in the middle there on that bar chart that started with, you know, advanced framing on the right, and then on the left, you know, had extra small homes. It was interesting because I saw on that and I can pull it up here for everyone's reference, but it showed it was referencing multifamily as 2,000 plus square feet. So I guess I was just wondering, I certainly don't come across many multifamily units that get above 1,200 square feet. I mean, I know it does happen, but I guess I'm just wondering from your perspective in that study, and here it is this really saying that they're anticipating a multifamily unit to be 2,000 square feet or an entire building?
Yeah, the point of the study was to compare like or apples to apples, take out the variables. So they just put, you know, they took out all the variables other than the type of material that was used. And so they compared similar square footage across all of those different building types, except for the two categories on the left, the small home, then extra small home. But I think you're right that by you know, multifamily will tend to not only have shared structural walls, which is more energy efficient, but also will tend to be smaller units. So that hopefully answers that question. But you know, to kind of double down on that concept, as I mentioned at the very beginning, I think it's probably fair to say that if you took that multifamily structure and shrunk it down to the size of a residential building, that is the most high performance type of ADU you can do. A basement conversion or other internal conversion is going to be higher performance than a property with a detached ADU on it.
Sure, yeah, thanks. And that study is pretty interesting. I mean, do you see them now that it's 10 years later, updating that, or maybe the Department of Energy or some other entity taking that on just to see if we're still in the same position?
I think it would be really interesting for other states to replicate that study, because that was based on the Oregon climate. And so I would be curious to see if those same results pop up in Michigan, Florida, the desert. I think that would be of great interest, but I haven't heard of similar studies being done. I know that study has had a lot of kind of policy impact, though, in terms of kind of influencing conversations around small housing in general. But no, as far as I know, it hasn't been replicated, duplicated, and I don't know of any other plans to do another study of it.
What setting policy aside, and say we get past that all over our country, what kind of barriers or opportunities do you see, briefly, both with appraisers, lenders, and realtors understanding what to do with these things?
Yeah, so that, appraising in general is actually maybe one of the thornier issues with ADUs. So I should mention that I run an event called ADU Academy. The next one is going to be on April 24th in Portland. And that is an event intended for professional designers, builders, lenders, realtors, and appraisers who are interested in this topic. And it will be taught by professional designers, builders, lenders, realtors, and appraisers who have a great degree of knowledge about ADUs. So, for example, the appraiser who's going to be doing the instructor for the academy is doing the first kind of statistically valid study of the contributory value of ADUs for resale that's ever been done in the US, because Portland has, as I mentioned, 2,900 permitted ADUs, 350 of them have transacted in the last 5 years on the market. So we actually do have enough sales comps to actually start to make valid conclusions about the contributory value. But to date, generally speaking, that's been kind of a fuzzy topic that people are like, yeah, ADUs add value, but we don't know how much. Yeah, I can say this with some degree of confidence: ADUs don't add as much value as they cost to construct. But moving on from the appraisal topic, financing for ADUs is getting better and better. It used to be kind of the biggest struggle for ADUs. It's like, man, these things are $200,000 to build. Who can afford to do that? But financing, at least in the markets where ADUs are popping, is gotten really good, because there's been a lot of institutional support emerging because of the popularity of ADUs in the discourse amongst policymakers. And so local lenders and credit unions are coming up with ADU-based renovation loan products, which look at the after rehab value and will do a refinance of the primary mortgage that includes the contributory value of the ADU, and then carry that, pay off the first mortgage, and then carry that money, the additional money for the ADU construction, in escrow, and dole that out to the GC during construction. And so that's one technique that's becoming more and more common for ADU lending now. No national banks do that, or actually maybe there's one that guaranteed rate might do that, but generally speaking, local lenders and credit unions are the way to go for renovation and construction loan financing. But the other factor that's at play here is where ADUs are taking off, as I mentioned earlier, tends to be areas that have an affordable housing crisis, i.e. they are rapidly appreciating markets, meaning housing is becoming much more expensive because land is becoming much more expensive quickly. And so people who own property are beneficiaries of that rapid escalation in land value, and therefore can tap into their appreciated equity through home equity lines of credit or cash out refinancing. And so that's kind of the large way in which a lot of people are funding the dominant parts of their development cost. Apart from that, it's just, you know, cash on hand and personal loans and credit card debt and other techniques like that. But there's definitely a lot of innovation occurring in the ADU financing space. And if you're interested in that particular topic and you want to hear about, you know, read about some of the latest and greatest stuff, there's a really good post on accessorydwellings.org, which lists a whole, it's called 2019 is the year of ADU financing innovation. And there's a whole bunch of kind of alternative financing ideas that are being discussed in there, so you can kind of see what's going on. There's also a lot of kind of philanthropically minded NGO ADU lending programs popping up in different jurisdictions. I don't know how much purchase they will get, but you know, at least the attempts are there to come up with loan products that work with a lower debt to income ratio homeowners who otherwise wouldn't qualify for renovation loan financing. So yeah, there's definitely a lot of cool stuff going on right now with ADU financing, and like I said, the appraisal research is coming out as we speak, and that will be posted on accessorydwellings.org as well.
Great. And one last question. I mean, with the housing or the labor shortage going on here, what opportunities do you see, if any, for you know, modular to kind of take on the ability to construct these ADUs and deliver them quickly? Do you see anything happening there?
I do, yeah. And I used to get a lot of questions from homeowners and from builders and designers about prefab, and I would just write it off and be like, yeah, you're the 1,000th person to talk about prefab, and I've never seen a prefab ADU. And that was like as of like 2 years ago. But in the last 2 years, there's definitely been some. Now, that is to say, there's hundreds and hundreds of websites of people with prefab ADUs. But if you actually ask them how many ADUs they've built, it's like 0, almost always. Now, but that's where my skepticism has been. But I now have seen at least 4 companies in the United States that are have been successful with modular and prefab ADUs, and they're scaling up in big ways. Now we're getting Skyline Champion, which is like the biggest prefab builder in the country, to get into the ADU space. So I think that as ADUs become more popular, more jurisdictions and more kind of suburban and rural contexts allow for ADUs, and as a result, there's more and more interest amongst people who don't have, you know, vast amounts of money through you know, their rapid appreciation, who want to build ADUs on their property. Then all of a sudden cost becomes a much more important variable for them. Like, they can only build an ADU if it's, you know, $100,000 or less, because that's all they can afford to build. There is a big market out there for prefab ADUs amongst people who want a inexpensive ADU, relatively speaking. I've visited a factory in Battleground, Washington, just across the river here from Portland. So I've seen what a factory building ADUs looks like. The biggest builder in the country is Valley Home Development in California, or prefabadu.com. And they're primarily a prefab model type of company. Now, I will remain skeptical of prefab in the sense that I don't know that prefab is going to work in a lot of urban infill contexts, which is really where I'm interested in seeing ADUs built because of the tight configurations of small properties. But modular construction, you know, panelized construction is also an option. And I think, you know, to the extent that that's occurring as a general trend in the United States, that would translate over to ADUs as well. But I don't think there's any particular reason why that would take off in the ADU market over just stick frame on site. Prefab has some benefits in that if you're literally building the entire thing offsite and you can ship it into a property, there's less disruption of the property, and that's a especially significant thing with ADU development because you are building on somebody's property where they currently live, and so reducing the time frame of construction on site is important. But the biggest variable is really, cost. And so when I see the kind of high-end, fancy pants, high performance prefab ADUs, I don't think those are going to actually, I think those will continue to not work as a business model, because if people can afford to get the high-end fancy pants ADUs, they're going to do it custom on site, generally speaking. At least that's my theory, and I haven't seen any reason to question that theory. But I do see the market for lower cost ADUs really ballooning, and the best way to achieve that is to build ADUs in factories. So with a few successful examples of kind of factory-based production prefab ADUs that I've seen, I can now say authoritatively, yes, that is a thing that we will see more and more of in the future. And I think that, I guess I have some qualms with that aesthetically, but I think from a high performance perspective, that's probably a very good thing, and that's probably where we should be going.
Great, Cole. Well, I really appreciate your time joining us and doing this today. Thanks for that. And just real quick before we close out, where can people go to contact you or learn more if they'd like?
Yeah, so that's my contact information up on the slide there. I would encourage people to check out buildinganadu.com to find my book, Backdoor Revolution, which is a book that covers both the development of ADUs as well as the kind of the people who want to get more ADUs built, how to go about doing that in their community. Buildinganadu.com also has a place where you can sign up to get emails from me. So that's a good site. Also, accessorydwellings.org is kind of a group blog that I run with a couple other volunteers, and that's a really good resource for people to read a whole bunch of articles about ADUs. And we encourage people to contribute articles as well. So if you're interested in, if you have some knowledge about ADUs and want to contribute, please reach out. So that's it.
Great. Cole Peterson, AccessoryDwellingStrategies.com. Thanks everyone for joining us. Have a great rest of your week, and stay safe out there. Take care. Bye.
Be sure to check out all of our courses available online that you can watch anytime and anywhere to pick up your CEUs. Before you go, make sure to subscribe to us on YouTube to get weekly updates and stay up to date on green building science courses, webinars, and home tours. Thanks again.